Ding dang dong. Ladies, gentlemen, welcome at Florence School of Regulation. I'm Jean-Michel Glachant, the director. I'm very happy pushing this debate online. We have about 200 people registered and 5 panelists. Whom are the panelists? Of course, people familiar with the issue. What's the issue? Do mature renewable technology, because we have several, need dedicated support from 2020 to 2030? That's a very key question for the industry, for the society, or for academics and researchers. Whom are the panelists? They are from the industry, Clemens, Cremer, EnBW, Fabio Genoese, Tractebel, or from the whole industry, Kuhn, Noyens, Eurelectric. There are also researchers from Fraunhofer, leading German and also leading European research institute, with Anne Held and Mario Agwitz. I'm only there to manage the debate. I have nothing to sell and nothing to buy. How will we do? We will start from the audience. We have 200 people. It was the pain to look at what they think. What they think is there. A clear majority, why only 51, but it's a clear majority nevertheless, wants to continue the support to mature technologies, which is, of course, questioning, because if they are mature, why should we support them? There is reasons, we will see. Only a small third, or a big third, because they are 35%, are opposed to this continuing financing, and 14% do not know. And I will humbly say that I am in this 14%. I would spontaneously have said, well, no, but why not? If you are convincing, you will convince me. How will we run this 1 hour debate? We will first start with the panelists for about 30 minutes. I did prepare questions. They are grouped into 3 baskets, logical, and we did allocate panelists into these baskets, and we still have time, we will cross the baskets. The first basket is about what are these famous mature technologies, how are they financed today? And we will get Mario and Kuhn. And then, how are they financed according to the winter package? And we will get Clemens and Fabio. It will be the first basket. Then a second basket. By the way, financing schemes for renewable have to be combined with the existing ETS. The way they combine, is it the most efficient way? The way we do it in the EU. And then we will get Anne and Kuhn. And then the same question, but flipped a little bit. Are existing RES scheme really compatible with the price for carbon provided by ETS? Or should we reform them again? And then we will get Clemens.
And if you don't mind, I would like to start. We have seen some spectacular development of some key renewable energy technologies, most prominently wind onshore and photovoltaics over the last 1-2 decades. We have now almost 300 gigawatts photovoltaics installed globally, even more wind onshore, and combined with this came spectacular cost reduction of these 2 technologies. And so these are the 2 technologies which we consider as almost mature. Some actors consider as almost mature. But how do we define almost mature
for everyone?
Exactly? First, I would say we asked for the fact that generation costs are comparable to conventional alternatives, and secondly, we ask for the fact that there's hardly any additional cost reduction. And the question is whether this is the case. And for the first question, I would say yes, for good locations and for specific countries, the costs are at a comparable level. However, not for Europe and reaching the target of 27% for the European level will mean that we will need quite a broad range of potentials to be actually exploited in Europe, and therefore a wide spectrum will be needed, and not for all of those locations the costs will be comparable to conventional alternatives. And for the second question, we think there is still substantial learning potential, and this is also backed by a wealth of literature. In particular, the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory has published a recent study under Nature Energy showing that wind, for example, has still a learning potential of 24% cost reduction by 2030 and about 40% by 2050. Mario? And 2 minutes, the potential cost reduction of photovoltaics are even stronger, about 60% within the next decade. So we think these technologies are almost mature, but not fully mature, and therefore there's still a potential innovation externality which gives reason to support technology learning further. And until today, we have financed such technologies mainly by long-term contracts, in the past by feed-in tariffs, for example, and these are now more and more transformed into auction-based contracts for difference, auction-based CFDs. And these contracts for difference are essentially long-term PPAs which mitigate the risk and therefore increase or maximize the revenue certainty from the point of view of investors, and therefore allow to finance these capital-intensive technologies at lowest cost of capital, and therefore also low costs for the consumers or for the society. Therefore, just to cut a long story short, these almost mature technologies are in particular these variable output capital-intensive technologies, wind onshore, photovoltaics, maybe some people even say wind offshore if you look at the most recent auction results. And these technologies are capital-intensive and are currently financed mainly by contracts for difference which mitigate investment risk.
Okay. Thank you, Mario. If I may compliment you on this, I can fully agree with what you've just told on the definition of mature technologies. These include indeed solar PV, onshore wind, and you rightly mentioned that offshore wind is on a steady cost decrease path. Certainly when you look at the latest tender results in some of the neighboring countries of Belgium here, and then these results are even more promising if you look at the next couple of years. If you look a bit closer, because you rightly mentioned the LCOE, so the cost of these technologies, if you compare these with the more conventional plants, one can notice that they have become increasingly competitive. If you look, for example, to wind onshore, the LCOE there, according to the studies that we do with our stakeholders, range between 30 and 100 megawatt hour. For PV, this is in the order of magnitude of 35 to 150 euros per megawatt hour, and they are becoming, let's say, comparable with typical coal and also CCGT. I mean, you also mentioned that indeed today these technologies, they receive support in the form of certificates, feed-in tariffs, feed-in premiums, and there are a lot of variations within those different definitions. From our point of view, if you look to what these type of financing schemes have done, one of our key messages has always been that we see that they have clearly, from the distortion to the functioning of electricity markets, and definitely led to higher costs for customers. However, the adoption of stated guidelines, the recent stated guidelines for the period 2014-2020, was a clear positive move forward in terms of how to move forward with the adoption of these technologies towards more market orientation and more in a more cost-efficient way. Because if you look at let's say the financing measures that come forward of the stated guidelines, you look at that all generators now are granted only a premium in addition to the market price. Generators must sell their electricity directly in the market. So beneficiaries must also be subject to balancing responsibilities, and these are all elements that improve the market uptake and the market orientation of these technologies. So at the same time, the rules state that there are no longer, let's say, there should no longer be any incentives to generate in times of negative prices, which all proves and acknowledges that these technologies, let's say, have left the immaturity stages, and when we look at how they are being set up and being promoted in competitive bidding processes. This is something that we as power sector have applauded and have welcomed, and it's to be expected that this will be continued in the next phase as well. But we'll come back to this in a later point in time in the discussion.
Hello, yes, I'm Chiara from the Florence School of Regulation. Mario, I would like you to take the role of Jean-Michel for a short while because he's having some problems, technical problems to access again. Okay. So if you don't mind, I'm sure you can replace him for a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, happily. So thanks a lot, Kuhn, for this judgment, and therefore I think we should go on to the next question, which ideally fits. From describing the status quo, we will now move a bit into the future and wonder how will actually financing of these mature technologies, where we seem to have general agreement about what these technologies are, will function in the future. So the Commission is now developing different key elements of the market design for the period post-2020, and so the question is, how will this market design influence the ability to finance these mature technologies or almost mature technologies, and what implications will this have on additional financing schemes? I would like Clemens Cremer and Fabio Genoese to give us their perspective on this important element.
So if I may start, well, first of all, it's a good thing to further develop the market design, and we believe that it will improve the options for marketing renewables if we have a further developed market design. Especially the coordination of markets will of course help to have a bigger market, and this especially a good thing for intermittent renewables that, if locked within a smaller market, can negatively affect the capture price dramatically. So this is an issue for smaller markets. I believe for larger markets the effect might be not so big. If we look further at measures that are now under discussion from the Commission, we see that price caps should be abolished at all, and this might be an important thing for flexible capacity that can really go into the market in times of scarcity, but I don't think that this specific measure will have a tremendous effect on the financing of renewables, as those renewables that we see as the most mature are more intermittent type of renewables. Then, of course, we see a big block dealing at the short-term markets, especially system services markets, which are short-term. And I think there is a twofold view to have on that. First of all, if renewables will be able to supply system services, we will have a bigger supply, and overall this should lead to an increased efficiency of system services supply. And as long as we assume they are competitive, and I believe there will be competitive renewables for system services, we will have an overall more cost-efficient supply of system services. This is good for the customers. On the other hand, of course, we have to keep in mind there's also a quality issue. We have to take care that the regulators will not, by the desire to open these markets for renewables, lower quality standards, because this might lead to the effect that if renewables fail to deliver, we have dramatic costs for failure of delivery. The question then arising from that, will this add a lot to the financing of renewables? And my personal view on that is no. We see that system services markets are very inelastic from the demand side. We don't see a big increase, or we don't literally see at all any increase of the demand from the network operators if prices will go down. So a big participation of renewables that might occur then will lead to a reduction of price. We at least have to assume that. And in turn, the earnings from system services might be lower than one might expect from presently observed prices. And overall, the view to these measures we see there, yes, they are helpful. They will open up new income streams to renewables, but I don't think it will be, at least for the larger markets, let's say, a game-changing factor to the financing of renewables.
Thanks a lot for this really wide spectrum and of market design impacts and the effect on renewable financing. Fabio, what would be your view on that?
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can all hear me. I tend to agree with Clemens, I think, on many points. In general, I'm confident that good progress was made with the winter package, especially for the access to new markets and thus access to new revenue streams. So ancillary services like frequency containment, frequency restoration are interesting for renewables if you open up the market. But again, I tend to agree that these markets are very small and that we haven't seen so far a big increase in market volume with an increasing share of renewables. So not more primary reserve has been contracted just because we have seen an increase of renewables. So in the end, if you increase supply and leave demand the same, probably the value of these markets will decrease as well. So in line with what Clemens says, I don't think this will play a big role in the financing part of renewables. For me, financing is clearly linked to the visibility on costs and revenues for renewables, and most important here is really the long-term price signal. I think in the winter package there's a general acknowledgement that the targeted increase of renewables requires long-term visibility on future revenue streams, which short-term markets will not give. It's not just about closing a gap, about being mature or immature, as you said, Mario, but about, let's say, the certainty of having these revenues or having them not. And higher certainty for sure will be reflected in the higher cost of capital and hence will increase the cost of building a renewables installation. A renewables installation is particular because it's capital intensive, costs accrue in the planning and construction phase. But there's not much room to decrease costs once the installation has been built. I think, again, it's a good movement towards auctioning because this is increasing it will enable competition and driving down costs. It's also confirmed by the international experience. We've seen remarkable auction results, I think in South America, but also in the Middle East on solar, but also I think the latest offshore wind auction here in the North Sea was really good step forward. Maybe let me add some insight from the rest of the world, since Tractebel is a global business unit of ENGIE. So part of our job is actually to develop concrete projects, mostly outside of Europe. I think the good news is that in many areas of the world, it's no longer a question of whether we build renewables or not, but more how much we can build. So say you have a hotel on a tropical island. if you build this new from scratch now, you will rely on a mixture of PV and diesel, versus, say, 10 years before, this was clearly only diesel. But this, on the other hand, means that these diesel systems are becoming fixed cost assets, whereas they were variable cost assets before. Diesel is running when there is no sun. And what we observe is that project financing is changing as well. Whereas before, these were EPC solutions mainly, meaning engineering, procurement, construction, meaning we built the thing and handed over the key, and the customer would run it themselves. Project financing is moving from EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction, to PPA, power purchase agreements. That means the customer doesn't want to own the assets. He wants to have a fixed rate, a fixed electricity price, and we build, run, and also operate the assets. And this applies both to the renewables part, being capital intensive as we know and that we all agree, but also to the conventional part, to the diesel part. So medium-scale consumers, like a hotel, prefer not to own conventional assets. They prefer not to decide upfront how much diesel they have to buy, because this would mean that you have to forecast your yield of solar, and if you're in a very remote area, this basically means high costs if you get it wrong. So what my general message is, I think in terms of market design, we've made a remarkable progress in terms of renewables. But if you're moving towards a high share of renewables, conventional assets are becoming backup, and hence also fixed cost assets, and project financing question is raised for these assets as well, as confirmed a bit in the international environment for remote areas where we see the very high shares of renewables already, if you, for instance, are on an island and mainly rely on diesel and PV.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabio. I think this gives another angle on this question and has made our overall answer even more holistic, from coming from the winter package and the market design towards particular applications, like with the example renewables on islands. I think this question directly transfers into the next one, which concerns the compatibility with the ETS. And the big question is now, these almost mature renewables are becoming more and more competitive with conventional prices, and the question is whether the market design initiatives can on their own create this competitiveness, or if not, together with a stringent ETS. And therefore, the key question, then, from my point of view, is: are financing schemes for renewables in the power sector combined with the ETS the most efficient and effective way to the further decarbonization goals set out by the EU, or would be another strategy be more efficient? And therefore, I would like to ask my colleague Anne Held and also Koen once again on their view.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Maybe I can start. The first question which is on the table is whether, or there have been broad discussions on the question whether sectoral support or specific support for renewables is still necessary if some of the technologies are achieving or are getting closer to technology maturity. And the reason why I think that this is, at the moment at least, still not the case, can be explained by two factors. The first one is related to the objectives of supporting or why we aim to increase the share of renewables, because besides the environmental externality, or besides the contribution to the environment, there are also other objectives, like reducing import dependency on other countries, and also, for instance, effects on local jobs. So this is the first point, and the second question is related to the economic efficiency of achieving a transition towards a low carbon energy system. And therefore, the CO2 or the ETS system alone is rather focuses on achieving cost efficiency on a short term, but supporting other technologies which would not receive support or under an ETS. Still need financial help in order to bring costs down on a longer term. So, from my point of view, the ETS focuses rather on a short term or on achieving a short or cost-efficient transition on a shorter term, whilst the renewables support is required to bring costs down on a longer term. And since, as we've heard in the beginning from Mario, that there are still cost reductions possible, as well as for wind onshore as well, and also for solar PV, I believe that support could still make economic sense. And there have also been studies, modeling studies, analyzing this question. And this brings me to the other reason why this sectoral support could help to decrease the cost of achieving an energy transition, which is related to the cost structure of renewables, with its high share of fixed costs and the risk or the relevant role of financing for renewables. So at the moment, the way a renewable or sectoral renewable support is designed, so providing long-term revenues for renewables, this helps to reduce investment risks and therefore may also help to bring the cost for the energy transition down. Another aspect is related to the distributional aspect, so to the question who pays for the energy transition. And there, provided that the ETS is characterized by one uniform price, the lower cost technologies kind of receive more economic support than required, and this can lead to higher costs for consumers than in case of technology or sector-specific support, where the support is really adapted to the real requirements.
Thanks a lot, Anne. Then I'll directly hand on to Koen for his view on this, which is probably a key element of your policy strategy, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, and I think primarily, what we say and what we believe is that the EU ETS and in particular strengthening of it is a no-regret option when you look at the further uptake and development of renewables. It is with a reinforced carbon price signal and an accelerated cap reduction that additional measures to promote renewables can be minimized in ETS sectors. So basically, we are talking here about increasing the cap being the linear reduction factor, as well as looking at how to deal with the current oversupply and what the market stability reserve can bring in that respect. We have some clear proposals on the table that are being discussed in the current ETS reform. One of them is looking at the MSR design parameters and in particular the intake rate, which we believe could be doubled. Furthermore, if you look to the past and look to the past risk policies, we indeed see that they have had an impact on greenhouse gas emission reductions in the sense that they also contributed to depressing the CO2 price as well as wholesale electricity prices because of excess in power supply. So a particular issue to mention here, I believe, is the issue of policy overlap, policy complementarity that also needs to be addressed. And again, here we believe that the ongoing ETS reform, which is coming in at more developed stages in the Council, needs to include clear provisions for the phase 4 how to address the impact of policy overlap. There are a lot of good ideas and different methodologies circulated and on the table. One of them definitely should make it to the ETS reform. as we also expect that there will be a continuation of any form of renewable support after 2020. At the same time, we also think that the existing overcapacity and the low market prices are not enough to justify the continued support. So the continuation of support for renewables, for mature renewables, is likely to result in a surplus situation as well. So continuation of that. So should member states, if they want to choose to continue to support for mature renewables after 2020, they should be done in the most cost efficient and market-based way, so by minimizing distortions, including those affecting the merit order, basically. So in that sense, if we reflect,
okay,
to the proposal that is being put on the table by the Commission, in that sense, we welcome the acknowledgement, the recast of the REST directive, that financial support for renewables is only an option. Also positive is that the proposal clearly states that support schemes for the future should avoid unnecessary market distortions. So again, ensure that producers take into consideration supply, demand of electricity, as well as grid constraints, and measures to further integrate RES in the market and ensure that producers respond to price signals. The proposal that is on the table, if I further elaborate on the proposal, remains, however, vague on some aspects. Some aspects that are necessary for investors in renewables, and let me be clear about this. I mean, it's in our sector, renewables today, they make up almost 30% of the electricity mix. So utilities do invest a lot, and they are committed to do so. So
I'm sorry for interrupting you. We are having an issue with your internet connection. I would like you to try to stop your webcam so that maybe it will be easier for us to follow your audio.
The sooner the better. As well as
we are experiencing
it should be fixed in this legislation rather than leaving it up.
Can you hear me? Oh, now, yes, can you hear me? Can you try to talk again, maybe? Okay, this was maybe too radical. Mario, I leave to you. Sorry, I was just trying to...
Perhaps now we have lost.
Okay, let me try this.
But in any case, we hope to have Koen back again very soon in the line.
Yes, I can hear you.
And then my next question is actually directly related to that, and I would like to address generally the compatibility between renewables support or financing scheme in any way and the ETS, and whether compatibility is possible or even likely, and what would be conditions for making these two elements of low carbon policy compatible. And I would like to hand on to Clemens Cremer for this important point again. And so Clemens, the floor is yours, and maybe we get Koen back afterwards again.
Yes, hopefully. Well, what about the compatibility? What we see now with more mature renewables being marketed directly by the producers, and the support schemes being allocated based on auctions, I think we already have reached quite a high degree of compatibility. If we, for example, see auction results for offshore wind or even also onshore wind that are quite low compared to feed-in tariffs that had been granted in the not so far away past. We have to believe that a future more positive view on carbon prices being reflected than in electricity prices will also lead to a stronger influence of the market price expectations in the bidding prices of the support grants in the auctions. So I believe the combination of a carbon policy being more stringent and leading to better and, let's say, long-lasting price signals on the one hand, and auctioning of support mechanism for renewables on the other hand might be quite compatible, because it might lead to a smooth, let's say, handover of support schemes to direct, let's say, market-based financing of renewables.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Clemens. And like to add my perspective also, because Kuhn mentioned that for the past towards 2020 renewable schemes that led to reduced CO2 prices, and in a way I would like to challenge this a bit, since we had a combined or renewable and energy and climate package towards 2020 with combined and aggregated targets for the CO2 mitigation and renewable deployment, and therefore the 20% renewables targets was fully integrated into the calculation of the ETS target and the overall greenhouse gas emission target for Europe. And since the renewables are not overshooting the 20% deployment pathway towards 2020, this integration is full active and therefore should have been implemented, or at least implicitly in the target setting for the ETS as well. So I would like to go on to the next and last question before we have time to open actually the questions to the wider audience. I am not sure whether Kuhn is back in line. It seems not the case. Therefore, I would like to address the last question, and probably would like to ask all three of you for a final statement by asking you, in which way do you think should support measures be designed in order to minimize the costs for consumers and for the society as a whole, and with this having in mind renewable support measures and their interrelation with an instrument like the ETS. I would like to ask with Anna again, and then would like to continue with Fabio and Clemens to conclude this round.
Okay, thank you, Mario, for this question. In my opinion, the challenge is to find a balance between the move towards market compatibility and on the one hand, and on the other hand, providing sufficient investment certainty in order to decrease financing costs. But at the same time, I think renewable support should allow for reacting in a flexible manner towards specific market situations, as for instance, the current situations of low prices in power and also in emission allowances market. So maybe one way to achieve this would be to continue with the auction-based support, provided that if no support is needed anymore, the auction outcome would indicate this with a price of 0. So auction-based support using feed-in premiums. There, of course, the concrete design, whether it's a sliding premium or a fixed premium, could still be decided. But the important thing is that the auction design allows to flexibly adapt, for instance, the quantity. So if there's a situation of overcapacity, the auction volume could be reduced for a year, and then if this situation is getting back to less overcapacity, it can be increased again. The important thing here is that these changes occur in a gradual manner, and that these are not too abrupt in order not to destroy investor credibility. So I think due to the high relevance of financing costs, providing long-term payment revenues at the moment is important, but we shouldn't forget to continue integrating renewables into the market. And of course, I believe that we have to ask this question again in 10 years maybe, and then I hope wind onshore and solar PV won't need any more specific renewable support. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And I'd like to give on immediately the floor to Fabio. Fabio, last time your voice was a bit low. I don't know whether you could increase that.
Yeah. Let's say, as I try to increase the microphone volume, is it better now?
Slightly, maybe. Yeah. Just speak loud.
Now it's off.
My echo? Okay. So I agree with you in that sense, Anne. I think something like a support system is necessary if you want to see this high deployment rates for renewables. I just would invite everybody to look a bit outside of Europe, what's happening there. And when we have an auction on renewables in Chile, nobody is calling this subsidy or support. It's simply an integral way of deploying renewables. So in that sense, I would also invite European policymakers to reflect this or to include this in their thinking, that this is not just simply paying subsidies to immature technologies, but an integral way of running a system, of going towards a system with a high share of renewables. And as added before, I think backup capacity is part of that. So we shouldn't restrict ourselves always just to renewables. Having said that, I think another important point to add is the cost allocation, which we haven't talked so far until now. In our general decarbonization strategy, we see that electricity is playing an integral role. This is, of course, thanks to the remarkable cost reductions in wind and solar electricity. But just as a reminder, electricity in OECD countries is 20%. In Europe, it's a bit more than 20% of final energy consumption. In non-OECD countries, it's certainly more towards 16%. So in our overall decarbonization strategy, electricity itself, the way it is now, plays only a minor role. So I think further decarbonization will be driven by explicit and implicit electrification of demand. What do I mean by explicit? Of course, moving towards electric cars or heat pumps, things like that. But by implicit electrification, you have to account for some solutions like power to hydrogen, power to gas, power to heat in general, because certain aspects will be very hard to electrify, thinking of industrial usages, but also heavy-duty transport. So, and yet we will see new electricity consumption to decarbonize other sectors such as industry, transport, or heating. And in this context, I think cost allocation, the question of cost allocation comes back. Today, we allocate the support costs for renewable electricity, so for financing, for supporting these renewables, mainly on the electricity bill. That means on people consuming electricity. So all these solutions that we imagine with electric vehicles, electric heat pumps, but also power to hydrogen, are in an unfavorable condition because you have a huge part of the electricity bill which is not related to producing electricity, but just paying off the old debt or burden of supporting electricity. And I think we need a much more honest debate on to which extent we want to decarbonize the other sectors, what role explicit and implicit electrification like solutions with power to hydrogen can play. In this context, regulatory certainty is really key. The framework today, at best, I would say it's unclear, so you don't know to which extent you have to pay taxes, levies, and grid fees if you do something like power to hydrogen. But at worst, it's simply unsustainable. It means it's suppressing any of these developments. And I think moving towards higher share of renewables, we have to look beyond the electricity sector.
Okay, that's certainly a very, very important point for the overall decarbonization strategy. So in order to have sufficient time for the overall debate, I would like now for two concise statements by Clemens and Kuhn still, maybe starting with Clemens, and then Kuhn, you have the right for a final statement on the way forward.
Well, I wouldn't like to add very much more because a lot of has been said already. Maybe some little comments. Anna had said that one should maybe have more dynamic policy making of adapting auctioning volumes to signs of overcapacity and so on. Yes, of course, one can do that, but should always keep in mind this will increase regulatory uncertainty, and this has effects. It can also especially have effects on the competitor scheme within markets, because only those with a large portfolio can, let's say, live better with such regulatory uncertainties. One more point to the ideal, let's say, combination of support measures with existing policies, especially the ETS carbon policy. On the long run, I think we should merge it, but really more on the long run, because we see still substantial flaws in the ETS dealing with the carbon budgets that have been set in a long time in advance and not being able to adapt to changes in the overall economy, leading to prices we observe now with very little investment incentives. To conclude, with the actual winter package design, we believe it's a good step forward in many aspects, but not in all. But it doesn't really tackle the issues we have with the long-term, let's say, financing of renewables. It will not add sufficiently to that.
Thanks a lot for this clear position. Koen, last but not least, we are first very happy to have you back in the group, and be happy about your final point of view.
I hope you can hear me now, loud and clear.
Yes,
it's fine. Okay, thank you. Perhaps I quickly follow up on the last point raised by Clemens, this long-term investment stability. This is indeed a key and crucial issue for our sector, which desires a predictable framework. And if you look at the proposal, the Clean Energy Package proposal on the table, and particularly the RES directive, the proposal there remains vague on some of the aspects. It's about getting the fundamental design principles right for financial support, well in advance and well known to investors well ahead of 2020. And that should be fixed in legislation rather than leaving it up to case-by-case decisions in the context of state aid approval procedures. So that is one of let's say the messages that I want to convey here, that investors indeed need stable regulatory frameworks until 2030. Let me also recall, let's say, what I said or tried to say when you lost me before, is that it is indeed a stable predictable framework that is required, but at the same time there is this no regret option of the EU ETS, and that is something, again, looking today what is happening. It is an option that is on the table. There are different design elements that can be improved. Even going further, the ETS is in a sense the climate policy instrument that delivers greenhouse gas reductions and leads to could lead to a cost-efficient reduction of emissions in the ETS sectors. But it's not only about that. If you look to the further take-up of renewables, we should look beyond those ETS sectors, and there again we come into the picture as electricity sector by pushing the electrification agenda, by pushing decarbonized electricity with an increasing amount of renewables in transport, heating and cooling. And there I follow up on what Fabio just mentioned on the development of heat pumps, electric vehicles, etc. You have actually an instrument in place that allows for a cost-effective decarbonization and take-up of renewables in other non-ETS sectors as well by further electrification. And I think this link is very important to make, that by further electrification you actually bring those non-ETS sectors indirectly or implicitly under the cap that has been set. And that's a win-win strategy both for the take of renewables in our sector, because there will be an implicit demand or push for the take-up of those technologies, as well as for those that need to further decarbonize in the non-ETS sectors. So let me conclude with that message.
Thank you very much, Koen. Sorry for jumping in. This was unexpected, as you know. Yeah. I'm trying to replace our moderator, Jean-Michel Glachant. I know it's impossible, but I have to try, because now we should move to the Q&A, open Q&A part, so that the audience that is here with us since the beginning can have some answers and contribution from you. I would like to help you to pick up the questions. If you cannot scroll properly the chat, for instance, you can see that there is a right bar. So I would like some of you to volunteer to start. I see, for instance, that Andreas Graf is asking something to Fabio near the hand in the chat, or you can pick.
Yeah, maybe I can pick a few ones. One of Andreas, I think Nicola also had a quite interesting questions. So Nicola, for instance, he was asking, increasing electrification in final consumption is not always a good strategy in the case of electric heating in France. This poses risk in cold winters. Yes, definitely. So that's why I think it's important to distinguish between explicit electrification and implicit electrification. So if you have electric heaters, this is immediately or directly has an impact on the electricity grid. If you have something like power to hydrogen, you actually decouple supply and demand. It means you produce hydrogen not where there's peak demand in electricity, but when there's off-peak demand. And this allows you actually to supply or to satisfy this heat demand maybe at a later stage. So it will be a mix. I think in some areas, like electric vehicles, you have an implicit, you already have a battery. It means you can shift, you can decide when to charge. So you don't have to charge when there's peak demand in the electricity sector. In some other areas, it's worth exploring a solution like power to hydrogen, power to heat, power to gas further on. Yeah, maybe taking one more and then leaving the floor to the others. Andreas, about the electrification or the focus on electricity, heating, and transport. I agree with you. I mean, just because we do electrification, we shouldn't back down on other sectors. But clearly, what we see is that it's the potential in electricity in the power sector for wind and solar are so good, the costs are decreasing, that maybe some of our initial thinking, if you look at the reference scenarios we did a couple of years ago, where we decided on the split between electricity, heating and transport, these should be revised to be relooked at, updated with the current thinking of renewable electricity potential and renewable costs, renewable electricity costs.
Thank you, Fabio. Let's go on with this anarchic Q&A. Who is the next one? Did you have the chance to read the questions? Don't let me choose, please. I'm not the right person to do that.
Well, maybe I can add on one comment that had been raised several times about the cannibalization effect of renewables. And yes, indeed, we will observe a cannibalization effect, but in a long-term market development. On the one hand, with a larger common market within the European Union, this cannibalization effect should be mitigated by just the increased market size. On the other hand, this cannibalization effect will, of course, then foster the development of flexibility options that we definitely will need then on the long term. And we can, I think at this point of time, not directly say that markets will be able to provide all this in a timely manner at, let's say, low costs, because the long-time signals for storage are somewhat blurred, maybe, let's put it like that. So we might think about what signals do we have for flexibility options in the medium-term future. Are they those that we can see from the markets are sufficient, or whether we have to rethink about these options too?
Grazie.
Okay.
Anne.
Maybe I can pick up another question.
Please do.
There was the question, I think, from Nicolo about the distributional effect and which analysis my argument was based on. So the analysis based on that, they have been done by the TU Vienna, and they have been published in a project report, Renewable, which analyzed the cost development of different target pathways up to the year 2030. And also, if you're interested, these arguments are all compiled in an issue paper on this question, which we have published yesterday in the context of the Towards 2030 project. So there, I think it's possible to have more the numbers behind it, and we can send the link around after the meeting.
Thank you, Anne. Then who else would like to continue?
Maybe another one. We still have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, there's
perhaps a final comment from my end, because
one,
I need to leave in 2 to 3 minutes.
I think
as I have another appointment. Perhaps.
Yes, please, Koen, don't worry, you can leave.
That's fine. Yes. Yeah, perhaps.
But we stay. You leave, but we stay.
A quick comment on let's say the value of the. That's good. That's good. Perhaps a quick comment on the value of the ETS. That was raised in a couple of comments here, and the link there with costs for consumers as well. I mean, one of the things that we've been analyzing at Eurelectric also is that the divergence and the fact that over time consumers have been paying a lot while wholesale prices have been coming down. An issue well recognized in the energy community. And one of the reflections that need to be made there is to look at how do you want to bring this let's say this flexibility and the fact that renewables costs have come down. How you bring this value to the final retail pricing. And again, here I don't think we should underestimate or give up, because that's what some people indicate here in the chat, give up the value that this ETS can bring, in the sense that it still is there, it is still being recognized as a European-wide instrument, it still plays a role on setting a price and impacting how decisions are taken that have an effect on setting wholesale market prices. By topping it up, by improving its focus, by strengthening it, you actually could provide the decarbonization focus and improve the value in the wholesale electricity prices and reduce the need for putting in place additional measures that basically define almost 6% of the retail bill today. And that is let's say this market rationale that we want to bring, that you can get to a decrease of final retail prices by basically allowing for more market to happen, by integrating renewables and making sure that decarbonization signal is done through markets and not through costly regulatory schemes put on top of the wholesale market price. With this, I need to conclude my contribution because I have to urgently run. But I thank you all for the interaction and for the opportunity for me to participate.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting to hear from you.
Thank you.
You can leave. Thank you. And
we received one question whether we could give all 2-3 final concluding remarks whether renewables financing would be needed for the period between 2020 and 2030. Maybe that's something to be addressed. And there has been one other question by Zeeman asking whether we can ever reach grid parity under rising interest rates and carrying the merchant risk of which would increase renewables HUE. And maybe I would like to start with this question and then also give a final remark from my point of view. I think it's actually a multi-dimensional environment which decides whether renewables can ever become competitive. And I think it depends on the stringency of the ETS target and increasing CO2 price. It depends on the development of flexibility and how this will smoothen the overall market prices, and it will depend on the further technology learning. And if cost reduction of renewables go on as they have done over the last decade, and we get with the stringent market stability reserve under the ETS meaningful CO2 prices and the flexibility will improve in the future with further market design improvements. We will see auction values of zero premium or close to zero premium, and therefore renewables reached this competitiveness in terms of overall grid costs. And therefore I'm on the one hand confident, but on the other hand I think we still need the instruments in order to guarantee that renewables targets can be reached until 2030, and we still have to consider that renewables are capital intensive technologies, and some financing regimes will be needed at least until after 2020, and then we can observe the auction prices and see whether how long this needs to be continued. Maybe others can add on this as well. And maybe, I would like to add one sentence as well for everybody who wants to learn more on then how to ideally design auctions and what would be elements of the 2030 package as this will evolve in the negotiation between Council, Parliament and Commission, and how grid integration of renewables should evolve in the long term. You are invited to take part in the renewables training, regulation and integration of renewable energy, taking part place between the 3rd of April and 12th of May at the Florence School of Regulation. Actually, the April will only be an online course, and there will be 3 days in residence from the 12th of May to from the 10th of May to the 12th of May, and both can be taken independently of each other. So please feel free to register to this course. It's going to be very interesting, among others with Alberto Potocnik and Leonardo Mio.
And a great course director.
You probably know both.
You don't want to mention yourself, but I want to make publicity. Okay, so I would like to have maybe your final remarks or consideration because it's the time is over. So first of all, I would like to thank you all very much, also on behalf of my director.
Is there not just 2 minutes for a final statement?
Sure you have if you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Maybe then I'll start. Just to elaborate maybe on 2 issues. One, will renewables ever become, let's say, competitive? And if we take in view the climate targets we have, especially the climate targets we have for Europe, I would definitely say yes, they will become competitive. We should take these climate targets serious. And I don't really see how conventionals by 2050 should be competitive against renewables if we want to achieve the climate targets. And the other question that just had been raised, well, if we have overcapacity now at the moment, why should we invest into renewables? And I would say definitely we have not only a 2050 target, we also have targets on the way. And we don't want to leave reaching long-term climate targets to a last-minute action. So we will need investment now into renewables, and renewables might need some support also in the period 2020 to 2030, most certainly. And so I'm quite confident we're on the right way, especially with improvement of markets design, also with improvement of allocation of support schemes via auctions. And we should address also the issues of the long-term integration with flexibility options as storage, or might it be production of power to hydrogen, if this becomes a viable option due to the, let's say, good qualities of hydrogen in terms of being stored more easily than electricity at, let's say, low costs and great volumes.
Thank you. Clemens?
Okay.
And Fabio?
I guess I have final words? No, maybe not. I guess it's you in the end. No, I think I can only compliment on what was already said. Clearly for me, to answer the original question in the chat, do we need support systems between 2020 and 2030? Clearly, yes. I mean, you wouldn't see the necessary deployment if you didn't have a dedicated instrument, if you want to say supporting the investment in these technologies. Again, I invite everybody to look at what's happening outside of Europe, where instruments like auctions and a contract for difference is not necessarily seen as support, but simply as a way of designing markets with a high share of renewables. I have never seen the Chilean government calling their auctions subsidies, but so be it. I think in the end we need something like this, whatever you want to call it. On the way, I think there's a lot to do, to learn, to improve the design of these auctions. We're far away from being perfect. We're still not sure whether project realization rates will be as hoped or as envisaged. So I think there's a lot to do also on policy research. I think Fraunhofer, also FSR, You're doing a great job in the European projects in pushing this forward. In general, what I would like to see is also having a bit more debate on how to increase the commercial long-term contracts, because the counterparty does not need to be always a grid operator in these kinds of systems. And a second key point for me to address in current policy research is the question of cost allocation. Who pays for the energy transition? Should it just be electricity consumers? If we know that sector coupling with power to hydrogen, power to heat might play an important role towards a further decarbonization pathway. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Fabio.
Thanks a lot, Fabio, for joining. And the equivalent to ladies first is now ladies get the last word. So Anne, what is your final?
No, just as a very few or a small addition regarding whether we still need support between 2020 and 2030. And from my opinion, we have to differentiate between the different technologies. So we can't say yes or no. It really depends on the technologies because they have different requirements. And the second point I wanted to make is that if we recommend the options, we still have to bear in mind that their good design is really challenging, and that we have to take in mind also issues like engaging smaller consumers and the society into these type of support. So it's not that easy, I think, but this could be the general framework. But designing the detailed support is challenging and should be adapted to the specific market and technology circumstances. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks to all of you. Kuhn has already left, but particular Clemens and Fabio, I'd like to thank you for your flexibility and your really excellent excellent contributions to this debate. I think it was really very timely and very important, and I think we moved forward. And so I'm happy to continue this debate either in written form or in any type of discussion we can involve in the next future. Thanks a lot, and also thanks to the Florence School for organizing.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you, to the panel and to the audience for being here today with us. As you said, we might have another chance maybe to discuss online, but this was a great session, so thank you everybody for being here, and see you next time online. I'm closing the session now.
Yeah.
Goodbye. Have a nice day.
Okay. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.